it, you could see the direction you're going in by the first thing you do. The first thing he did was not stuff that he's been talking about in the campaign about affordability and what have you. The
Right.
first thing was basically a frontal attack against Israel. And it's unfortunate when he, you know,
I do see a quote here. I see a
yes.
quote here from
What is the
MSN.
quote, Julie?
Israel tore into New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani after he revoked a pair of executive orders signed by former Mayor Eric Adams that supported the Jewish state. Here's the quote. On his very first day as New York City mayor, Mamdani shows his true face. He scraps the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism and lifts restrictions on boycotting Israel, Israel's foreign ministry wrote in a post on X. This isn't leadership. It's anti-Semitic gasoline on an open fire.
That is so unusual. Again, I don't
Wow.
think I've ever seen that. I've never seen such a raw message and accusation as I think was thrown out there by the consul general. But in this week's portion in Exodus, we really have the template of what anti-Semitism is all about. So if we take a look at it in Exodus chapter 1, sentence 8, let's take it from there. Vayakom melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yoda et Yosef. We're picking it up when a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And I'm just throwing out this idea. How often has it occurred that Jews have contributed mightily to a country's economy only to have their contributions forgotten? Let's remember that Joseph saved Egypt from being completely wiped off the map. He was the one who predicted there would be a famine and they should take precautions and store food. And now it's just a couple of years after his death, and there's a new king who leads the country, and he forgets Joseph. You never know that Vayakom Melech Hadash, just to broaden out the concept, look what's happening in Venezuela. Now, I'm one who actually supports what happened with Maduro, and I just don't want to get into the politics of that. But now his vice president has taken over. Vayakom Melech Hadash. But who knows? Maybe she'll be worse than he is. That's a whole other story. Separate from capturing this man is what happens now in Venezuela. I was in Venezuela about 13 years ago with Rabbi Shmuel Hertzfeld. I saw what was happening to the Jewish community. It was 50% of what it had been, and the anti-Semitism was so real. As a matter of fact, I think this vice president, who now has taken the oath of office, she she said that what occurred, this capture, had something to do with Zionism. It all comes back to Israel, something to do with Zionism. So a new king arose over Egypt who did not Joseph. And let's see what he says. Vayome el amo, he said to his people, surely we're sentence 9 of chapter 1. Hine am b'nei Israel, rav v'atzum mimenu. I see you have that on the board. He said to his people, behold the nation of Israel. Now, to my knowledge, this is the first time the Jewish people is called a nation. Now, interestingly, who calls us a nation? When are we called a nation for the first time? It's so designated by Pharaoh. And I write in Torah Avah, even Jews who wish to assimilate are often reminded of their Jewishness by anti-Semitic leaders. We're about ready to see that there is going to be all kinds of orders that are going to be put into place to repress to repress Egyptian Jewry Jews living in Egypt. And it's often the case, as we saw on October 7th, that Jews who were not identified became identified through the enemy. Hine am b'nei Yisrael, behold the people of Israel. He says, Vayome elamo, hine am b'nei Yisrael, ravatzu mimenu. Sentence 9. Hava nitchak lo. Come, let's deal wisely with them. Let us deal wisely with them. Ki rav pen yirbeh. In fact, let's go back to sentence 9. Hine am b'nei Yisrael, behold the nation of Israel, Rav are many, the atzum, and stronger mimenu. They are much too numerous for us. Now, when you read this, you say, there may have been many Jews, but what do you mean, too numerous for the Egyptians? The Egyptians were clearly the majority in that country. So, what does it mean when he says to his people, we've got a Jewish problem? This is not the first time it happened in the book of Genesis when the Philistines felt that they had a problem with Abraham who had moved into their environs. But here in the book of Exodus, what Pharaoh is really saying is, how do we deal with the Jewish problem? After all, the Jewish people are many and stronger than us. The prefix me menu, can be comparative. In other words, the word me could mean, behold, they are stronger than we are. But there's another way of understanding the prefix me, and that is that it's not comparative. It doesn't mean than us, but it's diminishing. And what he was saying is, behold, the children of Israel are mighty and strong from us. Pharaoh's claim was the latter, a claim that we've heard over the millennia. The Jews' success, whatever success the Jews have had, is from us. They've robbed it from us. They've stolen it from us. And I guess my object this morning in this humble teaching is to show that a lot of the anti-Semitic issues, they're built into our peoplehood for millennia. And here it is in the Bible. I believe the Bible, certainly no matter when it was written, I believe it was written at Sinai for those who think written in Ezra. But this is talking about the early Egyptian period. And what's being said here is he's claiming, when you think about it, it's really quite amazing. First of all, there's a new king. Jews have entered into so many countries of Europe, built up the country, and then a new leader forgets who the Jews are and they're expelled. There's hardly a country that has not expelled the Jews. And then the text continues, and the anti Semitism starts. And Jews who never identified themselves as Jews begin to identify themselves as Jews. And the claim being made is that whatever the Jews have, they have taken from us. And the text then continues in sentence 10. Hava nitchak malo. Come, let us deal wisely with them. Pen yirbeh, lest they will increase in number. V'hayaki tikrena milchaman, if there'll be a war. V'nosaf gamhu al sonenu, and they will join our enemies. They could become a fifth column. V'nilcham banu, and they will fight with the enemy against us. V'olah min haaretz, and they will leave the land. And it's Nachmanides, who lived in the 13th century, who wonders, why did Pharaoh have to deal wisely with the Jews? Why? After all, he was the king of the most powerful kingdom and could have vanquished the Jews in an instant. Why does he have to deal wisely with them? If he didn't like the Jews, he could have immediately started programs of oppression. And Nachmanides writes that Pharaoh had to deal wisely with the issue because he needed time to convince his own people of the goodness. He had to convince them of the righteousness, of the righteousness of the plan. He needed time to convince the people that what he was doing was correct. And he realized that if he would have immediately introduced doctrines that would really stand strongly against the Jews, that maybe the Jews would fight back. So he needed to begin a process to deal with what I would call a subtle anti Semitism. And with time, this implicit, subtle anti Semitism would be accepted by Egyptian society, and the Jews would then be broken, and anti Semitism would become avert. Let's think about Otoa Ish, Hitler, Yamach Shemo V'Zichro. He comes into power in what, 1932, 33. Now, he hated Jews all the way back. Mein Kampf is early. One wonders, why didn't he immediately start the annihilation of his genocide plan against the Jewish people? Even he needed time. And this actually is discussed in The Destruction of European Jewry by Rael Hilberg, where he talks about the different phases of the plan. I don't remember it exactly, but it runs along these lines. First, the Jews who were living outside of the cities, their lands were expropriated. Once their lands were taken, the Jews were forced to come into the cities because they had no lands out in the country. And in the lands, they were easily a target of being ghettoized. They were placed into ghettos. And we know this story. Slowly, slowly, the edicts became stronger and stronger. Jews couldn't be educated. Jews couldn't be doctors. Jews were then identified, and it went from one step to another step. You know, when I was in Australia, and Rabbi Ben Elton, he's a Chovdei rabbi. He's the rabbi of the great synagogue. It's a very important synagogue in Sydney. That's where all the politicians, and he has a large constituency as well. That's where I confronted the prime minister and premier, and actually, through Shuli's help, we were able to place an op-ed piece in the Telegraph, which is the most widely read paper in Australia. We tried to get it into the Australian, but when I saw that the editor of the op-ed page was Mohammed, I didn't think I had much of a chance, even though that's a Murdoch paper. So that night, Friday night, we were in Ben's home with Hinda, his wife, his children, and a whole bunch of people. And the discussion was all about anti-Semitism in Australia. Australia's at the end of the world. That's where many Holocaust survivors fled. They wanted to run to the end of the world. Many Soviet Jews running from oppression of Jews ran to the Soviet Union. And as I've mentioned to you, some of those who were murdered in Bandai were former Soviet Jews, former Soviet refuseniks. And the discussion was all about anti Semitism that's percolating in a very serious way in Australia at the end of the world. And I thought to myself, that kind of discussion, which we're having at our tables, whether it's during the week, on Shabbat, amongst friends, it wasn't the discussion, I think. I wasn't alive in the 30s. I don't think it was a discussion of 38 after Kristallnacht or 39, but it probably was a discussion which people had in 28, 29, 30 when Otoa Ish, when he came to power in 32, 33. What will be when you see that things are turning around and when you see what's going on in America. I mean, this is serious business. We've never seen openly the murder of Jews because they're Jews, the way we have seen it in recent years. Pittsburgh, 11 Jews are murdered, where somebody comes into the synagogue and elderly people are in the back. They're facing the ark, and he shoots them in the back in cold blood. And then San Diego, if you remember, and Jersey City, and Muncie. It's right here in Washington, D.C. Two innocent, a young man, a young woman, just mowed down for one reason. They're Jewish and all of the stuff that's going on. And there's something afoot here. And the key with anti-Semitism to beat anti-Semitism is to nip it in its bud. Once it's out there, and it is out there now, but the earlier you could stop it, the better. So when Pharaoh says, come deal wisely, I don't think there's a history of anti Semitism when the full power of anti Semitism was directed at the Jewish people all at once. It was a slow, subtle buildup. Hava nitchakma lo. And if we look further in the sentence, Julie, in sentence 11, Vayasimu alav sarei misim, and they put taskmasters over the Jews, limana noto, in order to afflict them, besivlotam. Now, when you look at it from that perspective, this subtle anti-Semitism begins with understandable taxation, mas, misim, understandable taxation, maybe working a few days for the government. And we build storehouses for Pharaoh, Pitom, and Ramses. And the text is going to say that that subtle anti-Semitism, if we take a look at sentence 13, then the sentence reads, Vayavidu Mitzrayim et Bnei Yisrael befarech. The Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites. Here, Pharaoh increases the oppression, working the Jews daily with rigor. Now, if I really encourage you to read chapter 1 of Exodus, you'll see how the full anti-Jewish power did not, as I've been saying, did not occur all at once. The text describes at first it's subtle, it's hardly noticeable, then it becomes more noticeable, and then overt. Before you can turn around, it's almost too late to turn it around. And then in Exodus chapter 1, let's take a look at sentence 22. Vayitzav paro lechol amo lemor, and Pharaoh commanded his people, saying, Kol haben hayilod, every son who will be born, hayaora tashlichuhu, cast him into the water, into the river. V'chol habat techayun, the daughters you can let live. So he charges the people, saying, there should be a male infanticide. Now, interestingly, it's not Pharaoh who sends his legions to do this. It's not Pharaoh himself, but he commands his people. In asking the Egyptians to kill all newborn males, Pharaoh is taking cover. When questioned, he'd respond, it wasn't me, but the people who spontaneously rose up. Think about Kristallnacht in 1938, the night of the broken glass, in Germany, in Austria. When people pushed back, when the world pushed back against Hitler, I don't even like to mention his name, Yamach Shemo V'Zichro. When they pushed back against him, what did he say? It wasn't me. This was a spontaneous reaction. I think there was a low grade a government figure who was killed in Paris. It wasn't me. This was a people's uprising. So Pharaoh, like the German elite, takes cover behind the people. That's the way anti-Semitism works. I'll take you just a few more sentences. Chapter 2, sentence 11. Vayihi bayamim hahen. Now we're picking up the story after Moses had already been born. He's raised in the house of Egypt. Vayigdal Moshe vayetzei el achav. Now Moshe, being privileged, was not amongst the Jews who were being oppressed. He was basically an outsider. He was a bystander. Now, the power of Moses, and here we're talking about how to combat anti-Semitism. Vayigdal Moshe, Moshe grows up, Vayetzei el Echav, and he goes to his brethren, to his kinfolk, Vayar b'sivlosam, and he sees their reflection. Now, here Moses, when hearing of an anti Semitic act, he doesn't run from his people. He runs to his people, to the community being attacked, empathizing with the deeper meaning of empathizing with their suffering. And then what does he see in the next sentence? Vayar ish mitzri make ish ivri me'achav. And he sees an Egyptian smiting a Jew only because he's a Jew. He saw an Egyptian beating a Jew. The Hebrew was attacked, says Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, a rabbi in the latter part of the 19th century, only because he was a Jew. Anti-Semitism must be condemned without fear, whatever its form or disguise, even anti-Semitism. Vayifen kovacho, and I'm going to translate it today, he turns this way and that way. And he's wondering, this way and that way, we must stand strong using every means at our disposal. That's the way I'm understanding he turned this way and that way to push back. You need political activism. You need legal maneuvers. You need to stand strong physically. It's critical as well to respond to hate with good deeds, moving from a reactive defense of our people to proactive commitment to our ideals. Now, I'm moving quickly going through this article from Torah Tafah. And truth be told, for those who have this book and for those who don't have this set, it's my honor to give it to you as a gift. There was someone who donated a whole bunch of them, and I'm so greatly pleased that he did so. And when reading this through, there are no footnotes, but there are parentheses indicating where the idea is coming from in the text. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 is a blueprint of how anti-Semitism works. And I close this piece by saying, I was born at the end of the Shoah, deeply affected by my parents' stories of what occurred. I was a never again Jew. At barricades protesting for Soviet Jewry and Ethiopian Jewry and demanding security for the state of Israel, we would scream, never again. We will never allow anti-Semitism to rear its ugly head again. If someone had told me 50 years ago that in half a century we would be facing the threat of anti-Semitism our community faces today, I would have said, impossible. And yet here we are, just 80 years after the Shoah, and anti-Semitism is alive and well. In every generation, anti-Semitism takes new forms, but the Bible teaches that at its core, it remains the same. And I would say that over the past 2 millennia, There's one great difference, and that is, of course, that we have a security place. We have an insurance policy. We do have the state of Israel. May it remain strong and may it remain eternal. And its eternality is dependent upon us, our doing our share. I hope things get better in the United States, but I'm not sure. I'm very grateful for all America has done for the Jews, but as you've heard me say, and what do I know? But my own sense is, if I were asked what's the future of Jews in America, I'm not sure. I am no longer sure, and we're seeing it right here in New York. As I said at the rally we had this past Thursday, surely maybe we can show those two tapes which we may have sent out. As I said then, if somebody would have told me that New York is going to be led by an anti-Zionist, someone who doesn't believe that we have the right to a Jewish state, my God, I would have said it's impossible. Impossible. And here we are. Can we get those two pieces up?
Yeah. Hold on one sec.
Then we'll open it up for discussion.
Um, Hold on. Okay, getting there. One sec. Well, Rabbi, maybe we'll choose one.
Okay, sure.
The one that was the interview.
Makes no difference.
Okay.
As a New Yorker, is there anything else you're concerned about or skeptical about in terms of the things he's proposed?
I pray that he succeed. I pray that his dream of improving the city succeeds. But for me, I am unyielding when it comes to commitment to the state of Israel, the critical importance of the Israel-American alliance, and above all, the most basic responsibility of government is the security of its citizens. And you, Mr. Mamdani, waffle on phrases like globalize the intifada. You are threatening, you are creating the atmosphere where Jews, God forbid, could be attacked. That is not the way to govern. That is not the way to be the mayor of all of the people of the city of New York.
Thank you very much. I appreciate.
Sure, if you can show the other one too, and then we'll open it up. Thank you. And at this moment, when you take office and you represent the downgrading of Israel, we spiritually and soulfully stand and speak truth to power and say to you the following. You stand against Israel. We stand with Israel. And in peace and with soulfulness and with Hadar Yisrael, I tell you, Mr. Mayor, wherever you go, the voice of moral conscience will follow you. The voice of Jewish conscience will follow you. The voice of a free, Jewish, democratic state of Israel will follow you forever and ever. As you stand against Israel, we stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. So let me open it up if anybody has any thought. And I want to encourage everyone. You probably will have insights on chapter 1 and chapter 2 that is something I didn't see, and I would love to hear from you. Hi, Edith. It's good to see you, Edith. Please.
Okay, so let me just see who I see. I see Edith, and I see Estelle, and I see Elaine and Tova. Let's go Estelle, Elaine, Tova. Just the order that was on my screen.